They erased me from every reunion for 10 years, so this time I didn't ask for a seat at their table. I bought the whole beach house they wanted, and when they showed up, they had to say my name just to enter. Stay with me, because this isn't just revenge. It's a lesson in reclaiming your worth. My name is Kalia Monroe. I'm 38 years old, a senior vice president at a biotech firm in Los Angeles and apparently still invisible to my own family. It happened again last Monday, the kind of Monday that should have started with lukewarm coffee, an overripe banana, and a mountain of forgettable emails. Instead, it began with a subject line that made me feel like I was 8 years old again. Brooks Family Beach Week, 2025, RSVP. Now the family reunion. The sacred annual gathering that I hadn't been invited to for over a decade, I clicked. Everyone was on the thread. Trinity, of course, my golden older sister, whose kids apparently fart glitter and recite Shakespeare at breakfast. Bryce Aunt Mel. Even cousin Darren, who hadn't been sober or civil since 2003. But me nowhere, not a typo, not an afterthought. Just omitted. I stared at the screen waiting for my name to appear like it might materialize if I blinked hard enough. It didn't. I closed the laptop harder than necessary, the slap of plastic on plastic echoing through my apartment, sleek, quiet, spotless. A place that matched my resume but never quite felt like home. I looked around. No photos on the wall, no mess on the floor. Just the silence of a woman who had learned how to live alone without bitterness. Only habit. Without thinking. I reached for the second shelf on my bookcase. Tucked behind a marketing manual and a dried lavender bouquet was a small turquoise glass shell, iridescent, delicate, and chipped on the underside. My mother gave it to me on my 10th birthday. We'd stopped at a roadside antique store on the way to the beach house. I remember how she held it up to the sun and said, "You're my special girl. You deserve something as rare as this." I believed her. I carried that shell in my pocket for weeks, slept with it under my pillow like it could whisper promises in the dark. And then she stopped saying, I was special. Somewhere between Trinity's first piano recital and my decision to major in biochemistry. The warmth faded. Her voice changed, so did her words. "Oh, that's just Kalia, always busy with work, you know how she gets. So intense. She's the one who moved too far to care. Not my daughter, not my joy. Just a cautionary tale about what happens when a woman gets too ambitious for her own good." I held the shell, now the glass cool against my palm. Its shimmer had dulled over the years, but it still caught the light just enough to remind me it was once beautiful. I hadn't touched it in months. This wasn't the first time they'd forgotten me. The first time, Trinity said the invite must have gone to spam. The second, Mom said the bunk room was already full. The third time, no one said anything at all. And still, I called. I texted. I sent birthday gifts. I tried. God, I tried. Until trying started to feel like begging, and then came the silence. 10 years. 10 years of ghost seats at the table. 10 years of edited photos where my face had been cropped out or never captured. 10 years of group texts I wasn't added to family memories. I only heard about when someone tagged Trinity on Facebook. 10 years of being alive, successful, and completely invisible. I remember one year they posted a photo of the family fire pit. The same fire pit I helped build when I was 12, hauling stones with bare hands and scraped knees. In the background, just barely, was an empty white Adirondack chair with a sun hat draped over the armrest. Mine. I had left it there the summer before I moved away. They didn't remove it. They didn't mention it. It was a ghost seat, and I was the ghost. I closed my fingers around the shell, the small ache behind my ribs. Familiar doll reminded me that some wounds don't bleed. They echo. I once asked my father why I wasn't in the family group chat. It was years ago before I stopped asking. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, "You're always so busy, sweetheart. We didn't want to bother you." I didn't ask again. The truth is, I've built a good life, a damn good one. My name is on patents and contracts and performance bonuses. I worked my way up from lab assistant to SVP in an industry where people forget your name faster than they shake your hand. I own my own home, drive a car I love, and drink wine I actually enjoy. Not just the kind on sale, but none of that has ever mattered to them. Not like Trinity's gender reveal parties, not like Bryce's engagement at 27, not like Aunt Mel's lemon bars. So when that email popped up and my name was once again absent, I didn't cry, I didn't call. I didn't even text Savannah to vent. Instead, I asked myself a single question. What if I stopped waiting to be invited and made sure they couldn't ignore me anymore? That's when it started. Not with a scream or a slammed door or a dramatic ultimatum, just a quiet, calculated shift. This time I wouldn't ask for a seat. This time I'd own the table. The email had been easy enough to delete. What came after, though, wasn't so simple. It was late evening, the sun barely hanging over the Santa Monica skyline, bleeding gold across my living room floor. I wasn't thinking about revenge or family or anything poetic. I was just restless. And then, without planning to, I typed the name of the beach house into my search bar. It was muscle memory. My grandmother used to call it the Blue Rest, a 2-story cottage off Ocean Crest Boulevard, with a wraparound porch and hand-painted shutters. I hadn't been there in years, but I still remembered the pattern of light through the kitchen blinds, the hiss of the coffee percolator, the old oak table with a burn mark from my first attempt at making pancakes. When the listing popped up, it took me a second to process it. There it was. Charming 5BR beachfront home, ocean views, family-owned. Asking price, just under $3 million. 12 photos. Photo 1. The front porch still weathered, but now with a glossy filter. Photo 2, the hallway I used to tiptoe down when Trinity said I breathed too loudly. Photo 3, the bunk room that had once been mine, now staged with nautical pillows and impersonal comfort. And then the kitchen. My breath caught. That kitchen had once been ours. It smelled of cinnamon, wet towels, and sea breeze. It held 1,000 small betrayals, and maybe 2 or 3 real smiles. I could still see my mother standing by the sink, not looking at me as she asked if I had remembered to vacuum the guest room I always did. No one thanked me. They were selling it. Without a word. Without a single group chat message. Without telling me. This wasn't just another snub. This was erasure. Deliberate, polished, and listed for a viewing on Saturday. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat very still, and then I remembered something. I was 9 years old the summer Trinity won a sandcastle contest. Except she didn't build the castle I had. I spent hours crafting turrets out of damp sand, digging trenches for moats, decorating with crushed shells. Trinity came by in the last 15 minutes, pressed a single piece of sea glass into the highest tower, and when the judge asked who built it, she smiled. Trinity Monroe, age 11? Mom clapped, Dad snapped photos. I stood to the side, salt drying on my skin. My name never spoken. Later that night, while I swept sand from the kitchen floor, my mother patted Trinity's head and said, "You're going places I've never forgotten." The weight of that silence. It's why I work the way I do. It's why my name is on patents and project boards. It's why no one steals my work anymore. I leaned forward, pulled my laptop closer, and opened my personal financial dashboard, savings high 6 figures. Stock portfolio stable. Credit immaculate emergency fund. Untouched. I clicked through tabs like I was clicking through years of absence. Reunions missed. Birthdays. Texted Mother's Day cards signed but never reciprocated. I had the means. More importantly, I had the will. Not out of spite. Out of principle. They wanted to let go of the house quietly, shame-free. Maybe even flip it for profit. Host one last reunion for the real family and pass the keys along to strangers. But that house was the only place I ever truly knew I didn't belong, and somehow that made it mine more than theirs. And I imagined it. Trinity showing up with her curated gift bags, Mom making her honey lemon roast, someone asking, "Wait, where's Kalia?" and someone else replying, "She's not coming again. You know how she is." As if I were a storm cloud in their perfect little sky, they would stand on the porch and toast to family, not knowing that family had moved on and that the porch now belonged to her. To me. I called the number on the listing. "Hi," I said when the agent picked up. "I'm interested in scheduling a private viewing for the Ocean Crest property. I'd like to see it before the open house." She asked for my name, Kalia Monroe, I replied. There was a pause just long enough to taste. "I believe you're already on file," she said, checking something. "Your family used to—" "Yes," I cut in. "But not anymore." After I hung up, I sat back in my chair. The city outside my window had gone lavender. Planes blinked across the sky like slow-moving stars. Somewhere below, laughter drifted up from a restaurant patio. I used to want back into the warmth of a family dinner, back into the group photo, back into the invitation. But I didn't need that anymore. I didn't want the seat. I wanted the deed. The call came just after 10:15 p.m., the kind of hour reserved for emergencies or emotional landmines. I stared at the screen, Mom. I hadn't heard her voice in months. Not since last year's Mother's Day when I sent flowers and got a thumbs-up emoji in return. I let it ring 3 times before picking up, swallowing the familiar dread. "Hi, Kalia," she said in that overly sweet tone, one she reserved for customer service and uncomfortable family requests. "I hope I didn't wake you." I could hear clinking glass in the background, a dinner party probably, or just her nightly wine and rationalizations. "No," I replied. "What's going on?" A pause. A deep breath like she was bracing herself for pushback. "I just wanted to chat about the beach trip. It's coming up soon, and, well, you know how full the house gets. Trinity's youngest has trouble sleeping without his sound machine, and he really needs the bunk room this year. And Mel's knees, poor thing. She just can't handle the pullout anymore. My room. My old room. The one with the mural I painted when I was 12. The one where I had taped my college acceptance letters to the wall before they were torn down to make space for Trinity's wedding prep photos. "So we were thinking," she continued, "just for this year, maybe you could sit this one out. It's not personal. Kalia, it's just space. You understand, don't you?" That word again. Understand. I was always supposed to understand. Understand why. Trinity got everything. Understand why my birthdays were skipped. Understand why my seat at the table was always the one they could give away. There was something cruel about how gently she said it. "I see," I said slowly. "You're not upset, right?" she added quickly. "You know how crowded it gets." There it was, the line that had followed me for decades. You know how crowded it gets. They'd used it to justify so much. Why there was no room in the car when I came home from college. Why there was no guest bed for me at Thanksgiving. Why I wasn't invited to Aunt Carol's retirement party. The Airbnb only had 5 bedrooms, sweetie. Surely you understand. The truth was, the house had always had room. What it didn't have was space for me. "I've heard that before," I said. "Every time you don't want to make room, it's about logistics. But I've seen you fit Trinity's in-laws, her 2 kids, and their nanny into that house. You make space when you want to." "That's not fair," she snapped, dropping the soft voice like a cracked mask. "You always make everything so dramatic." "No, Mom. I just finally stopped pretending this was normal." There was a long pause. I could hear her exhale. "Suit yourself?" she said quietly. "You're the one choosing to pull away. Don't blame us for that." Then she hung up. "No, good night." "No, I love you." Just silence. I sat frozen in my living room, surrounded by the walls. I had paid for the furniture I'd assembled, the framed MBA diploma from Harvard, that stared down at me like a cruel joke. I had earned everything in this apartment, every certificate, every raise, every lamp. But the people I had worked so hard to impress had no place for me. Not even now. Especially not now. My phone buzzed. A message from Savannah. They did it again, didn't they? I replied. Told me there's no space. Trinity's kid gets my room. Logistics. Another message came almost instantly. They're not even hiding it anymore. It's not logistics. It's erasure. I stared at the screen. The words landed like truth does. Sharp and heavy. Savannah knew she'd seen it all from the sidelines. She'd sat with me on dorm room floors when I cried after holiday exclusions. She was the one who baked me a birthday cake the year my family forgot altogether. She didn't share my blood, but she shared something deeper. Memory and presence. They're daring you, she wrote next. They want you to stay small, quiet, forgotten. She was right, and I was done playing along. I stood up, crossed the room, and opened the drawer where I kept my documents. I pulled out the manila folder marked Ocean Crest, Realtor copy. I ran my fingers over the edge, steady, deliberate. I wasn't going to demand a seat anymore. I wasn't going to knock. I was going to own the door. That night, I sat down with my laptop logged into my financial dashboard and sent the final confirmation to the agent. Subject line viewing confirmed. Friday 3 p.m. client, Kalia Monroe. And just before I closed my inbox, I typed one final message to Savannah. They say there's no room for me, but they forgot. I'm about to buy the whole house. The storage unit smelled like dust and memories I hadn't opened it in nearly 5 years. Unit 43B still labeled K. Monroe, MISC. A long hallway stretched behind me. Metal doors flickering fluorescent lights, the kind of sterile cold you feel in your bones. I stood in front of the roll-up gate and hesitated. Then I unlocked the latch and pulled it open. It groaned in protest, as if even the building knew this wasn't going to be easy. Inside my first apartment's couch, a crooked bookshelf, boxes labeled college taxes, and Grandma. I stepped carefully between them, brushing aside a stack of old winter coats. And there at the back sat the cedar trunk. Grandma's, the one she'd brought with her when she moved west after Grandpa died. She always said it wasn't just a box. It was a time capsule. I hadn't opened it since the day we packed up her room. I knelt down, fingers trembling as I worked the rusted latch free. The scent of lavender sachets hit me, instantly faded but still familiar. It was her scent. And suddenly I wasn't a grown woman anymore. I was 10 again, sitting on her lap, listening to her say, Kalia, you're going to do things they don't see coming. And that's your power. Inside everything was neatly folded, knitted scarves, brittle photographs, a jar of buttons, and on top a journal, hardcover ocean blue with tiny shells glued to the corners in her unmistakably clumsy pattern. I used to tease her. They'll fall off in a week. She'd smiled. Then you'll have to glue your own truth to it. Tucked inside the front cover was a sealed envelope, my name written in her slanted cursive. For Kalia, open only when the silence becomes unbearable. My throat tightened. I sat cross-legged on the cold floor and broke the seal. There wasn't much inside, just a letter and a trust document. The letter read, One day you'll understand why I left this for you, and not for the rest of them. Love doesn't always come from those who raise us. Sometimes it finds its way through the cracks. Use this when the silence becomes unbearable. I blinked against the sting in my eyes. The trust document was legal. Precise, signed, witnessed, and notarized. I flipped through the pages trying to understand what I was holding, and then I saw it. A clause, hidden beneath legal language but unmistakable. Should the existing deed holders of 404 Ocean Crest Boulevard become financially delinquent or fail to meet outlined obligations, property tax insurance, or maintenance the beneficiary, Kalia Monroe reserves the right to execute full title transfer without contest as per the conditions of the Gellhorn Trust. I stared at the line. Then I read it again. The beach house wasn't just on the market. It had been listed quietly, urgently. They were trying to sell before the tax lien became public, and Grandma had known. She had known this day would come, that the silence would become a wall I could no longer climb. So she handed me the door. The next morning, I booked a consultation with a law office in Newport McCarran and Wells. A partner in his 60s sat across from me, glasses low on his nose, flipping through the trust with a soft whistle. "This clause," he said, tapping the page, "isn't just enforceable. It's airtight. I swallowed hard, so I can... If the current owners are behind on taxes, or have defaulted on the insurance and this document checks out." He held up the notarized page. "Then yes, you have full rights to execute a title transfer, and if they try to fight it," he smiled faintly, "based on this wording, they'd lose." "Quickly," his assistant returned minutes later with a public records printout. Delinquency confirmed, property tax unpaid for over 9 months. It was real. I could take the house. I walked out of the office in a daze, the documents clutched to my chest like a shield I never knew I was allowed to carry. The air outside was warm, laced with ocean salt. I sat in my car, opened the journal again, and ran my fingers along the crooked shells. Then I whispered, "You were right, Grandma." The silence finally got too loud. That night, I didn't call anyone. I didn't text Savannah. I just sat by the window of my apartment, the legal packet laid out before me, and stared at the beach house photo still open on my browser. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I'd keep swallowing it all, every exclusion, every excuse, every... We just assumed. But I had checked the clause. They didn't. They forgot to read the papers. I never forgot how they made me invisible. The lobby of Ocean Crest looked exactly as I remembered it. Whitewashed walls, driftwood furniture, a faint citrus scent pumped in through the vents. The same stone fountain burbled in the corner. The same old desk stood under a new logo, polished but unchanged. I arrived early. The receptionist, a young woman in a pale green polo, greeted me with a nervous smile when I handed her my ID. "Welcome, Miss Monroe." "Sorry, Gellhorn?" she asked, squinting at her screen. I nodded. "My legal name. Gellhorn was my grandmother's maiden name." "I'm the primary guest on record, right?" she said. "All checked in. Just let us know when your other guests are expected." I told her, "Give it about 20 minutes, but please don't confirm anything until I say so." She looked confused, but nodded. I took the elevator to the second-floor lounge, where I could look down over the check-in desk unseen. It didn't take long. Trinity's white SUV pulled up, first doors flying open, followed by their usual luggage parade matching monogrammed duffel bags, pool floaties, 2 toddlers in sandals. Next came Mom's silver sedan, cautious as ever, with her pressed linen blazer and rolled-up real estate listings clutched to her chest. They breezed into the lobby like they owned the place. I watched it unfold. "Reservation for the Brooks family," Trinity announced. The receptionist blinked. "I'm sorry, I don't see a reservation under that name." My sister laughed. "Maybe try Monroe or Gellhorn." The girl tapped, frowned. "I do have a Miss Gellhorn listed, but I can't find a Brooks or Trinity Monroe on the guest list." "What?" Mom's voice was sharp. "That can't be right. We've come here every summer." The girl looked up, polite but firm. "Is Miss Gellhorn part of your party?" "She's our daughter," Mom snapped. "Of course she's part of the party." The girl hesitated, then looked over her shoulder, right where I was now, walking toward them. I descended the stairs slowly. My heels clicked softly against the tiled floor. Mom turned first, stiffening. Trinity blinked. Both wore the exact same expression, an almost comical mix of confusion, annoyance, and dawning realization. I stopped beside them. "There's no need to escalate," I told the receptionist calmly. "I'll clarify things." Trinity stepped forward. "Kalia, what the hell are you doing?" I turned to her with a measured look. "I'm checking in." "The house is under my name." Mom's face darkened. "This isn't funny. I'm not joking," I said. "The house was transferred 2 weeks ago through a trust, legally and completely." "I'm the new deed holder," Trinity scoffed. You bought the house. Why would you do that? I didn't just buy it. I said, I inherited the right. Grandma left a clause. You all forgot to read the paperwork. I didn't. They stared at me. Then Trinity crossed her arms, voice rising. So, this is payback. After all these years, you blindside us. This was meant to be a family reunion. I looked at her, really looked. The woman who had once gotten credit for every childhood sandcastle I ever built, who laughed when I was excluded, who said nothing when Mom told me I was too intense. And now she stood there suddenly, the victim. I didn't do anything to the family, I said evenly. I just stopped doing everything to belong. Mom opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The lobby was silent. The receptionist turned to me. Would you like to proceed with check-in for your guests? I nodded. Yes. Please show my guests to their rooms, and if anyone not listed tries to enter kindly, let security handle it. You can't be serious, Mom hissed. You'd really turn your back on us. We're blood. I'm serious, I replied. And blood never guaranteed belonging in this family. Actions did, and yours have spoken for years. Trinity looked stunned. You planned this? No, I said. You did. Every time you left me off a list, every time you said there wasn't room. You just didn't think I'd ever have the courage or the legal right to say no. They didn't say anything. I handed my keycard to the receptionist and smiled. Thank you. Room 204, please prepare for one guest. The rest can wait for my signal. And then I walked away, slow, steady, not triumphant, just done asking, done shrinking, done pretending. I didn't want the very thing they told me I couldn't have, a family who never made space for me. I had made my own. The day of the hearing, the sky was the color of wet stone gray, quiet, like the world was holding its breath. I arrived at the courthouse early, a soft blue folder pressed to my chest. No entourage, no lawyer in a $1,000 suit. Just me, in the navy dress. Grandma once called steel-willed blue. The courtroom buzzed gently as I stepped in. Local reporters sat on the left, scribbling notes on notepads. A few old neighbors filled the rear benches, probably drawn by gossip. Savannah was there too, eyes steady, arms folded like a human anchor. Across the aisle sat my mother and Trinity. Their eyes flicked up as I entered. They wore expressions so carefully curated, it hurt to look at Trinity's jaw tight. My mother's mouth drawn into a line she wore every time she had to be civil. The clerk called out, Case 235A. Brooks v. Gellhorn. Allegation, unlawful coercion of deed transfer. Their attorney stood first. Young, too confident the kind of man who hadn't yet learned the weight of his words, Your Honor. My clients contend that Miss Kalia Gellhorn leveraged emotional manipulation to coerce her aging father into transferring the deed to the family's generational property. He was recovering from a fall at the time, vulnerable alone, misled. We asked the court to reverse the deed transfer and reinstate ownership under the family trust. He paused before manipulation, letting it hang heavy. I didn't flinch. The judge, a tall woman in her 50s with sharp cheekbones and a no-nonsense voice, turned to me. Miss Gellhorn, your response? I rose slowly. My voice was quiet but unwavering. With the court's permission, I'd like to submit 2 recordings, 1 video, 1 audio, as well as documentation of the trust notarized and legally binding. These recordings illustrate my father's intent and the family's pattern of exclusion. Proceed, she said. The bailiff dimmed the lights. On the monitor, a video began to play. It was shot on the porch of the beach house 2 summers ago. My father sat in a wicker chair, sunlight warming his face, a mug of coffee in hand. His voice was clear. I want Kalia to have this place, he said. She's the only one who came back for me after the fall, the only one who ever asked how I was not what I could give. In the video, I was off-screen asking, Are you sure? He nodded. I'm sure. They always made her feel like a guest. But she's not. She's the legacy. A ripple of gasps moved through the room. Even Trinity shifted in her seat. I stepped forward. The second piece is audio recorded during a family Zoom call 6 months ago. The speaker crackled. It was Trinity's voice, unmistakable. Let her rot in her condo. She was never part of this family, not really. If she wanted in, she should have been easier to control. Silence. I could feel it sinking into everyone's skin. Ooh, that kind of silence isn't empty, it's heavy. Submitted with these is the legal clause from the Gellhorn Trust granting me the right to assume ownership under the condition of tax delinquency, which, as of the date of transfer, had been in default for 9 months. The judge nodded, eyes moving across the documents. She turned to my mother. Mrs. Brooks, do you deny that your daughter Kalia was excluded from multiple family events over the last 10 years? My mother folded her arms. That's not the issue here. The judge raised her eyebrows. It is now. She turned to Trinity. Do you contest the authenticity of this audio? Trinity swallowed. I don't recall saying those words. The judge smirked slightly. Yet here they are. Crystal clear. After reviewing the pages in front of her, the judge leaned back in her chair. This court finds no evidence of coercion and no legal grounds for reversal of deed transfer. The trust documentation is valid. The clause enforceable. Miss Gellhorn acted within her rights with full evidence of intent and legal authorization. Then she paused and delivered the line I'd waited my whole life to hear. This court is not here to preserve tradition when tradition is simply a mask for cruelty. The room fell still. Trinity's mouth opened as if to protest, but nothing came out. I closed my folder and sat down slowly. The weight of 10 years lifting not all at once but steadily. Savannah reached over and placed her hand over mine. You did it, she whispered. No, I said softly. I remembered who I am. Outside the sky had shifted. The gray had given way to the softest blue, like a bruise finally healing. I sat on a bench outside the courthouse and reached into my bag. Wrapped in a small linen pouch was the shell wind chime from Grandma's chest. I untied it carefully. One shell cracked the string slightly frayed, but it still rang gently in the breeze. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And after all this time, the sound wasn't just pretty. It was proof I had been dismissed, erased. But I was never absent. I was always here. And now so was my voice. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pulled into the driveway. The ocean air had shifted saltier somehow, maybe sweeter. The kind of breeze that didn't just brush against your skin but reminded you to breathe again. The beach house stood just as I remembered it. Same slatted siding, same curved white railing along the porch. Nothing dramatic, no renovations, no grand declarations of ownership. And I didn't want any. I stepped out of the car slowly, letting the wind push the hair from my face and walked toward the door. For a moment, my fingers hovered over the doorknob. I wasn't stepping into a trophy. I was stepping into memory, yes, but also reclamation. The door creaked open easily as if it had been waiting. Inside, the place looked paused. Not abandoned, not cold, just paused. There was still a half-burned candle by the fireplace, a water glass left on the kitchen island, a folded blanket with a strand of blonde hair, Trinity's maybe still clinging to the fabric. I didn't throw anything out. I didn't storm through with anger. Instead, I walked room by room like a curator tending to an exhibit. I touched surfaces, smoothed edges, noticed. This wasn't about erasing what they left behind. It was about deciding what I would keep. Upstairs. The master bedroom was filled with light. The bed still made crisp sheets untouched. But what caught my eye was the built-in bookshelf. Low and wide, lined with forgotten paperbacks, half-read magazines, and tucked near the edge, a small tangle of string. I leaned closer. There it was, the seashell wind chime, the one Grandma and I made when I was 8. Back then, we spent an entire afternoon combing the beach searching for shells that sounded right, she'd said. Some shells just hum better in the wind. You'll hear it when you listen long enough. We strung them together with fishing line and pale blue yarn. I painted my initials on one of the larger pieces, lopsided and smudged. It had hung from this porch for years, until one summer someone took it down and forgot to put it back. I sat cross-legged on the floor and brought it into my lap. Some shells were chipped. One had cracked completely. The string was frayed and dusty. It didn't look like much, but neither had I, and somehow we were both still standing. I didn't rush. I untangled the knots slowly, laid each shell in the sunlight. Some were still beautiful, others sharp broken, but I didn't throw any away. Not everything broken needed replacing. Some things just needed a steadier hand. I spent the afternoon repairing the wind chime, not for perfection, but so it could sing again. I used new string from the linen drawer, knotted it, the way Grandma taught me. Double wrap, loop, tighten, let go. When I finished, I walked to the front porch and hung it exactly where it used to be, just under the arch of the awning, where the breeze always knew how to find it. And when the wind caught it, it rang. Not loudly, not flawlessly, but clearly. Later, I was sweeping the front steps when a voice called out behind me. "Excuse me." "Kalia." I turned, Mrs. Donnelly. She lived 2 doors down, had since I was a child, always in wide-brimmed hats and carrying lemon bars and old tins. She stepped onto the porch slowly, her eyes kind and a little watery. I just wanted to say, "Welcome home," she said. "Your father used to talk about you. You know." I blinked. "He did." She nodded. "Of course. Always said you were the one who asked about the tide tables when you were little. That girl thinks in tides." He told me once. I never forgot that I stood there, a broom still in one hand, feeling something crack open softly inside me. She smiled. "The house suits you better now." "It always did." I thanked her, and after she left, I sat on the porch legs pulled up, watching the water shimmer just beyond the dunes. The wind chime moved beside me, each sound a reminder that not all inheritances come on paper. Some come in the quiet. What you notice, what you choose to carry, what you decide to fix. No fireworks, no cheering crowd. Just a shell swinging in the breeze and the quiet confirmation that the house still stood, so did I. The message came before dawn. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, briefly lighting up the dark trinity. "Are you really going to ruin this for everyone? It was supposed to be about family." That word, again. Family. How often they had twisted it into a weapon. How casually they used it to demand loyalty without offering love. I didn't hesitate. I typed one line. "No, I'm not ruining anything. I'm just taking back what's mine." Then I hit mute on the entire thread. For the first time in years, her silence felt like a gift. Outside, the waves whispered their usual rhythms, but I could feel something in the air had shifted. A chapter had ended. By the time the sun rose, the world had already noticed. The article came first on a lifestyle blog known more for celebrity divorces than real-life reckonings. Woman wins beach house in explosive, family lawsuit, estranged daughter becomes legal owner after viral trial. Then came the screenshots, tweets, hashtags. Strangers argued in the comments about inheritance, loyalty, boundaries. I was heartless to some, a hero to others. They didn't know my name yesterday, but today they had opinions about my whole life. A college classmate messaged, saw the headline, "Wild. You okay, a colleague. Tell me that court scene was real. You're a legend." I didn't reply. Not because I was ashamed, but because none of them had been there for the decades of silence of being left off the list. The photo. The memory. Savannah showed up around noon holding iced coffee and her trademark raised eyebrow. She handed me one cup and sat across the porch table. "So? How's it feel being the subject of 1,000 pieces?" I smiled wryly, louder than I expected. but quieter where it matters. She leaned back. Trinity posted again. Something vague and poetic about betrayal and bloodlines. Let her, I said. I'm done narrating the part where I apologize for not playing along. We sat in silence, sipping slowly. The kind of silence that didn't ache. It just was. Later, after she left, I opened my laptop and pulled up the property management portal. There was one last thing to do. Subject final confirmation of ownership and booking control. To the Ocean Crest property team. Please update all internal systems to reflect that. I, Kalia Gellhorn, am the sole and final authority on guest approval, leasing, and maintenance of 404 Ocean Crest, Belumd. No reunions. No exceptions. This is no longer a borrowed space. This is my home. I clicked send, and it was done. The wind rustled through the open window. I heard the chime stir a faint, hesitant jingle. Like it, too, was testing this new piece. I stood and walked to the bookshelf in the hallway, pulled down the old journal, the one I used to write in during college, when I still believed I had to earn love through success. I flipped to a blank page and wrote, I didn't burn the bridge. I just stopped begging to cross it. I didn't scream for them to see me. I stood still long enough to see myself. I tore the page out and pinned it above the entryway mirror. Not for guests. For me. That evening, I lit a candle in the kitchen. Not scented, just plain beeswax. I placed it next to the repaired wind chime that now lay drying on the counter. One by one, I hung the shells again, stringing them like old prayers, and when I stepped out onto the porch to hang it, I whispered the words I had longed to hear as a child, but now offered freely to myself. You made it. You stayed soft, and you stayed. The chime stirred in the ocean breeze. No audience, no applause, just the echo of something reclaimed. And for the first time, I didn't need anyone to clap because I was no longer waiting to be let in. I had already opened the door for myself and closed it behind the noise. It had been almost a year since the courtroom, since the silence from Trinity became permanent, since I stopped flinching every time my phone lit up with a familiar name. I once longed to see. On an autumn afternoon, brushed with soft wind and golden light, I drove along the familiar country road past citrus groves and weathered fences toward the small cemetery on the hill. A scoop of lavender honey ice cream sat melting gently in a sealed jar beside me. It had been her favorite. The cemetery was empty. Just me and the sound of breeze weaving through dry grass. I found her grave under the same crooked maple trees still standing still, casting dappled shadows on her name. The stone was simple, just like her. No quotes. Just a birth date, a dash, and a legacy. No chisel could capture. I knelt down and placed the ice cream at the base of her marker. Hi, Grandma, I whispered. I made it. Not just through the court case, not just into the house. I made it. Through the part where I thought love had to hurt. I brushed a few dry leaves from the corner of the stone, then pulled out something wrapped in soft cloth. Our seashell wind chime, the one she'd helped me make when I was 8, painted initials and all. I'd repaired, it restored it, but hadn't quite known where it belonged, until now. As I was looping the string around a low branch above her grave, a small voice called out behind me. Is that a wind chime? I turned. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, stood with her father near the path. Curly hair, striped shirt, wide, curious eyes. Yes, I said, smiling softly. I made it with my grandma when I was your age. She stepped closer, looking up at the shells gently clinking in the wind. How does it know when to make sound? I held the chime still for a moment, then let the breeze take it. It sings, I told her, only when the wind is just strong enough. Not too much, not too little. It needs courage, just like us. She tilted her head thoughtfully. So it's like brave music. I laughed. Exactly that. Her father called to her and she gave me one more bright look before skipping off. And I stayed there for a long while, under that tree, the chime whispering overhead, the ice cream slowly melting into earth. I thought about all the things I used to believe. Legacy meant inheritance, reputation, bloodline. But standing there, I realized none of that ever mattered. Legacy is a choice. It's who you show up for. It's the stories you rewrite when the old ones wound too deep. It's choosing not to pass down the silence you inherited. I ran my fingers over the edge of Grandma's stone. "Thank you," I whispered. "You gave me more than memories. You gave me a map." And then I remembered the last thing she ever said to me before her mind started to slip. Don't let them convince you that kindness means shrinking. A strong woman holds the door open but knows when to close it too. That evening back at the house, I stood in the doorway with the wind at my back. The sea beyond the porch was silver with moonlight. Inside the walls no longer echoed with absence. They were filled with something quieter, steadier. Me. I brewed a pot of chamomile tea, pulled out an old journal, and on the first clean page wrote a letter not to Trinity or Iris or even my mother, but to someone I hadn't met yet, maybe a goddaughter. Maybe the future daughter of Savannah. Maybe just a young girl who would one day sit at this porch with questions in her eyes and wonder if she mattered. Dear you. If you're reading this, it means you've been told you're too much, or too quiet, or not enough. Maybe you were told to lower your voice or your expectations. Maybe you believed them, I did too. But then I learned that legacy isn't a name on a deed. It's the courage to protect your voice even when no one else hears it yet. This house, these walls stood because I stopped shrinking, because I chose peace over permission. And now it's yours too. Make it full of light. Let it echo with truth. Let the wind chimes sing Kalia. I tore out the page, folded it carefully, and placed it in a small wooden box near the bookshelf. Not to be hidden, but to be found. As I stood to close the window, the wind chime caught the breeze again, clear and soft. A melody born not of storm, but of strength. I hadn't returned to the house to win it back. I had become the kind of woman who deserved to walk through its doors. And I did. One step at a time, with my name, with my truth, with no need to knock again,